next, I want to introduce my Congresswoman Susie Lee, who is here today to share a few words with us and give us a great opening to set us into our next panel about Roe versus Wade. So, Congresswoman, welcome to the program. Congresswoman represents Congressional District 3 in Southern Nevada, and like I said, I am so proud to have her as my Congresswoman. Welcome to the program today.
Good morning, Battle-Born Progress. I'm so honored to be addressing you this morning as we come off another successful election cycle where we defended all 3 House seats and, of course, re-elected Catherine Cortez Masto to the Senate, securing our Democratic majority there. We have demonstrated who we are as Nevada Democrats and shown that we will fight for our values that guide every policy at the local, state, and federal levels. And we have delivered on those values with historic actions signed into law, from infrastructure to American manufacturing, gun violence prevention, healthcare protections for our veterans and seniors, and yes, the largest investment in tackling climate change in U.S. history with the Inflation Reduction Act. And we have defended our democracy. Just a little over 2 years ago on January 6th, I was doing my constitutional duty to enshrine the peaceful transfer of power after the American people elected Joe Biden as president. But as we all know, that day brought out some of the darkest attacks we have seen on our democracy. But in November's elections, Nevadans were crystal clear. We stood against the lies for political power. We chose voting rights over voter suppression, and we sent every single federal Democrat back to Washington to keep up the fight in defense of our sacred democracy. And that is no small feat. These midterms were stacked against us. The historic trends, the pundits, the forecasters all said there would be a massive red wave and that Nevada would be at the center of it. But standing here today, we all know that it was nothing near a red wave. Nevadans rejected an agenda that put our democracy at risk, that put reproductive rights in the hands of politicians, and that fundamentally put politics over people. It took all of us to make it happen and to put Nevada on the map as the battle-born, battleground state that it is. As we all know from being glued to our TVs, Senator Catherine Cortez Masto's historic victory put us over the finish line in protecting our majority. And with my victory, along with Congressman Stephen Horsford and Congresswoman Dina Titus, we secured 3 critical toss-up seats for Democrats in the House. Make no mistake, Nevada is the state to be watching. Our grit, our determination, and fierce independence all make this state one of the most important in the country. And in this coming cycle, I am proud that our state will be leading the front of the pack in primaries to nominate a Democratic candidate for president. To see what is at stake at this moment, look no further than the legislation that House Republicans brought to the floor in their very first week. The very first bill they brought to the floor would defund the Inflation Reduction Act. This is a bill that fights climate change, creates jobs, and brings down costs. And not only that, their legislation would make it easier for the wealthy and well-connected to cheat on their taxes, while hard-working, tax-paying Americans pay their fair share. Also in their very first week, Republicans made it clear that they're going to continue to assault a woman's right to choose with misinformation, criminalization, and even federal restriction. House Democrats are united with the vast majority of Nevadans and Americans who rejected this extreme agenda in November. But the reality is that Washington is much different this year than last. With the Republican House and a Democratic Senate, many will call this a divided government. Pundits are already predicting gridlock and divisiveness in politics as usual. But I'm hopeful that Congress can move past that, because when that happens, the American people lose. Last Congress, with the Democratic control of the House, Senate, and the presidency, we worked together, but not just as Democrats. We brought along several Republicans. We actually accomplished a lot on a bipartisan basis. The PACT Act to provide health care for our veterans. The Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the first gun violence prevention legislation to pass in decades. The CHIPS and Science Act to boost American manufacturing, and of course, the largest infrastructure package in a generation. All of these were bipartisan. The bar has been set high, but I'm an optimist. I'm a problem solver and one of the most bipartisan members in the House of Representatives. And I'm committed to seeing that Congress works together, because when we do, the American people benefit. Whether it's on our historic drought in the water infrastructure that Nevadans will depend on regardless of their political beliefs, or the mental health crisis that has been laid bare in the wake of this pandemic, or on finally passing comprehensive immigration reform. There is simply too much work to get done to let partisan politics stand in the way. I believe that we can work together without compromising our values, and that is the optimism that I hope to leave with you today. Thank you all so very much, and please enjoy the rest of the summit.
Thank you, Congresswoman, for your words, and thank you for all your good work in Washington, D.C. for us. All right, we are going to turn the music back on, take a very, very quick break. Do not go away. Our next panel is all about Roe versus Wade and the future of Roe in Nevada. So we're going to be talking about the legislative session and all things abortion care when we come back. So stay tuned. We'll be right back with you. Welcome back, everyone, for this very important panel. So happy we could do this today to commemorate the 50th anniversary of Roe versus Wade. We have a very stellar panel today for you all. Some of the people I look up to most in the reproductive rights movement, and they're going to talk about Roe and beyond and where we go from here, both here in Nevada and all across the country. So I want to welcome Paula Luna, who is our operations manager. She is going to be leading today's discussion for us. Paula, welcome to the summit. Please introduce your panel and get us started.
Hi, everyone. As Annette mentioned, my name is Paula Luna. I am the operations manager at Battleborn Progress. I use she, her, and they pronouns. And I don't know if you can hear, but even my dogs are super excited about this panel. So apologies if you hear them in the background. I'm really honored to kick off this session, our second and last day of our Progressive Summit. I'm especially honored because this session is going to commemorate today, the 50th anniversary of Roe versus Wade. We're going to be talking about the latest in abortion access since the fall of Roe and discuss what is next in the fight for reproductive choice. I say we, but this panel will really be led by some amazing experts. We have Jen Ferris with Progress Now, Imani Gandhi with Rewire News, Macy Haverda with, Imani Gandhi. I said I wasn't going to do that wrong, and I did. I'm sorry. Macy Haverda with Wild West Action Fund, and Shannon Russell with Catholics for Choice. Jen, I wanted to start with you. Today marks 50 years since Roe versus Wade, and as we know, it was overturned in June. Can you fill us in on what has been happening on the national level since the fall of Roe?
Yeah, thanks for having me here, Paula, and the team at Battleborn. It's really a pleasure to be with everybody. I'm Jen, and I'm the National Advocacy Director at Progress Now. I've had 2 abortions, and I've worked in abortion advocacy for the last 15 years. And to answer your question, Paula, today it feels like we should have a mournful day because it feels like we should have been celebrating a big number anniversary for Roe. And I am mourning the lack of access, but I have to say that it was always abundantly clear that Roe was not enough. I long for abortion access for each and every person, but at the same time, part of me is relieved that this year we aren't expected to celebrate the bare minimum, the floor, and preserving access. I think with the overturn of Roe, today we're free to celebrate and imagine all the ways in which abortion and reproductive freedom show up in our worlds. Our movement was never about Roe. It was about people. It was about the people who have abortions like me and the people who love them and their families and communities. Just as the extremist-packed courts and legislators are working to rip apart our health and safety, our communities are coming through for us to mend those safety nets and make them twice as strong. As some access to abortion has eroded, 14 states now have 0 abortion providers. Groups have risen up to ensure easy information about and delivery of the pills needed for medication abortion. Abortion funds, one of which you're going to hear from on this panel in a moment, have expanded their reach and their services. They've built networks and levels of care for patients that ensure that nothing but the government keeps a person from abortion, not money, not a need for a ride, and not a need for a babysitter. It's bleak in so many places, but in others, they're actually expanding access. 17 states and at least 24 municipalities have passed legislation or issued executive orders to protect and expand abortion care. 4 states have expanded the settings and providers who can provide abortion, and another 4 have passed laws protecting providers of abortion. The attacks are continuous, and we can expect to see more states lose their access to abortion in the next year and the following. But we cannot lose hope. We can't lose sight of the individuals who are working tirelessly to reach the patients, no matter how hard the government tries to stop.
Thank you so much. And I'm so glad that you opened with that, because I think, we are going to get into all those details. We're going to get into where it's expanded, what's next. That really was the floor. So where do we go from here? And how that doesn't stop everything that's going on to prevent abortions is not stopping abortion, right? We know that it's not going to stop. We're going to keep having them. So I want to turn to Macy because, in Nevada, we have safeguarded abortion access. And we know that doesn't mean we were not touched by the Dobbs decision. How has that affected reproductive access in Nevada? What's left to do?
Hi everyone, Macy Humberto, she, her pronouns. I don't know why I am so nervous, but I am. I just figured I'd share that. I think one of the things that we were thinking about last summer, right? Like looking back at some of my notes from last summer and what I was thinking about kind of before Dobbs and everything fell, we were really looking at how, kind of what Jen was saying about how access was always an issue in the first place, but Nevada at least had safeguarded some of that, right? So with what happened in the 90s, we know that abortion is that is available up to 24 weeks. But here's the big issue. There's only so many providers. There's only so many appointments available for people. People are starting to come from all across the country. I kind of think of Nevada as being kind of one of the very last, abortion neutral states. So most of our partner states, most of our partner funds are coming from places where their abortion funds are incredibly well funded. Some of them have state level Medicaid coverage for abortion. And in Nevada, we don't really have a lot of that. Our abortion funds, there's 2 of them, and we're both relatively young, both relatively underfunded. So it's just been really wild to see the number of people that kind of come in and how many people are seeking care in Nevada now. So that's just one of the things that I think about here. There's lots of other things we could do. I, for one, have always been a big proponent of looking into increasing access via Medicaid, as I said, but also looking at maybe having non-doctor providers providing access to abortion as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to get into, why, funding abortion is so important. So I'm going to come back to that question. I do want to invite the rest of our panelists to at least answer a question first. So I'm going to switch over to Amani for a little bit. And I think this might take our conversation a little bit in a different direction, because a few days ago, you were actually talking about feeling radically positive since the fall of Roe. And I just wanted to talk about that and, why that is.
I think it was Jen who was saying that, she's happy that we don't have to celebrate a floor because Roe was that you, Jen? I hope so. Anyway, Roe was the floor. Roe didn't work for most people in this country. Roe was great for white middle-class women, white upper-class women. 2 years after the decision dropped, Henry Hyde said, well, the only people I can go after are poor people, so let's go ahead and take abortion rights away from them. So, from jump, it was always the floor. The way that the movement organized itself in the earlier years before the reproductive justice movement sort of took hold was very white-centric and white-dominated. And so a lot of Black women, brown women, other people of color felt like their voices weren't heard. And now, we have this reproductive justice framework. Over the last 10 years that I've been doing this work, we've seen that framework spread. We've seen, white-led organizations, the sort of dominant repro organizations, start to embrace this framework. Organizations like Planned Parenthood, develop Planned Parenthood Black communities, so the Black people who work there can organize. And all of that creates community. All of that creates a world where we can work together to make sure that the least among us have something, have what we have. And I tend to say, and I've said this for 10 years, that if we center the most vulnerable people in our activism, then everybody wins. Because trickle down never works, right? It trickles up. So if we center trans women of color in our activism, right? They're the most vulnerable people in the world, I think, right now, then everyone benefits, right? And so what I'm appreciative in this post-Roe era is the sense of community that has begun to sprung up among groups that perhaps maybe didn't work together in the past, particularly now with the attacks on trans people and this new lavender scare. I've seen a real big shift in terms of the abortion rights movement, in terms of being more inclusive, in terms of being really outspoken about how important it is to be inclusive, to say things like pregnant people instead of pregnant women. And all of that creates a way that we can dismantle this sort of neoliberal capitalist society that keeps some people down and enables other people to thrive. And I think that we need to work so that we can all thrive. And I, as someone who goes by Angry Black Lady on Twitter, it might seem a little bit odd that I'm like, yay, radical joy. But part of that is due to my podcast co-host, best friend, spouse, etc., Jessica Mason-Piccolo, who convinced me to move to Colorado, has a great community here in Colorado. There's a thriving reproductive rights activist community here in Colorado. And when I moved here, I felt that. I felt like, oh, community. People who were really fired up to go and talk about repro, not just in dark conference rooms where everyone is sort of sad and depressed, but we did a food fight in Denver where it was a food fight for repro, and a bunch of people came around and we handed out golden uteruses for people who had the best food, and it was really fun. But it was also a bunch of people. It was hosted by these white guys who run a distillery in Denver. A couple of white guys who I never would have looked at and thought, oh yeah, these are the guys that are going to be writing for repro, but they were, and they wanted to know what they could do to help, and that is because of these attacks on Roe. And so I think a lot of the people who were sort of poo-pooing us, saying, oh, Roe's going to be fine, understand that obviously Roe is not going to be fine, and are becoming more involved. And part of that involvement means gathering together, trying to be happy. We don't have to suffer in order to be activists and in order to be social justice warriors. I like to reclaim that term because I don't see what's wrong with being a social justice warrior. So if we focus less on misery and more on radical joy, I think it opens up our hearts to ideas that we may not have otherwise considered, and to talk to people we may not otherwise have thought to talk to. And so, it's 6-7 months past, and I thought maybe this weird radical joy thing that I was doing was going to fade, but it hasn't. So I would just encourage people to, when you start to feel like it's all too much, you need to find a community, whether it's on Twitter, although Twitter's dying, whether it's on Reddit, whether it's just in a message group, an iMessage chat. You have to find a way to connect to people because it can be very isolating if you don't. And when you connect to people, it's hard to not feel joyful when you're connected to people who believe in the same things that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally understand that. Like, you know, trying to be, you know, commemorate like the day, but also say, okay, well, you know, that was the floor. Let's go from here. And I am gonna go and we're gonna talk about this in the panel. But another thing that you were saying leads me right into what I wanted to talk to Shannon about, because you know we really stepped up and everybody said, like, you know what, these rights are, during the midterms they said that this is, abortion access is absolutely something that we want. Voter rights, that's something that we want to protect. But especially like on the abortion end, you know, this clearly includes people of faith. And I just want Shannon to kind of bring in and talk a little bit about like that myth that, you know, people of faith don't want abortion access. Everybody wants abortion access, you know. So speak a little bit on that, Shannon. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, thank you so much, Paula. I'm really honored to be here with you all today. I'm Shannon Russell. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm honored to serve as the Director of Policy at Catholics for Choice. And I also used to work at the National Council of Jewish Women. So my expertise really is at this intersection of faith and reproductive health rights and justice. And what Catholics for Choice really does is to strive to be an expression of Catholicism as it's lived by everyday Catholics, by the people who are in the pews. And we really pay particular attention to abortion because the Catholic hierarchy, you know, like the men in the red robes, have devoted disproportionate funding, fear-mongering, stigma, and paid lobbyists to stripping away our rights. They've spent decades and so much money wedding anti-abortion ideologies with the Catholic faith and redefining religious liberty by pursuing protections for themselves and for large institutions, and by imposing their views not only on all Catholics, including those who disagree with them, but on people of diverse religious traditions and people of no faith. So you'll probably remember that in August, reproductive justice activists in Kansas brought hope to our entire movement, and they drove really outstanding turnout to the primaries, and they soundly defeated a proposed amendment to the state constitution that would have removed an explicit right to abortion by a vote of 59% to 41%. But you might not know that the archdiocese and individual Catholic parishes and the Kansas Catholic Conference spent upwards of $3 million in support of the proposal. And that's more than half of the total that was spent on efforts to pass the referendum. So that's absolutely ridiculous, and it's an abuse of our faith. And really, the vast majority of Catholics don't want these injustices to be done in our name. Like, the Pew Research Center has said that 68% of Catholics did not want Roe to be overturned, and 75% of Catholics believe that abortion should be legal in all or most circumstances. And really, this faithful pro-choice majority supports abortion access, not in spite of our Catholic faith, but because of it. As Catholics, we're really called to strive for reproductive freedom and access to comprehensive, affordable, equitable care for everyone, because it's really intrinsic to respecting human dignity and achieving social justice. As Catholics, we're called to center the lives of people who are most marginalized and who are often denied the basic human rights to maintain personal bodily autonomy, to have or not have children, and to parent the children that we do have in safe and sustainable communities. So our faith values demand that we dismantle these sinful structures of oppression like systemic racism and gender inequality and economic insecurity, so that people can really freely choose how best to build and care for their families. And finally, as Catholics, we really respect the separation of church and state. And we value religious pluralism and diversity, because we know that there's no liberation without freedom of and from religion. So really, ultimately, our vision at Catholics for Choice is that all people everywhere can freely determine their sexual and reproductive destinies with respect and affirmation. And we're here to remind pro-choice Catholics and people of faith that we're here for you, and you're not alone. So last year, when the annual so-called March for Life invaded DC and cities around the country, we projected affirmative messages supporting reproductive freedom onto the Basilica of the National Shrine. of the Immaculate Conception in Washington, D.C., which is the largest Catholic church in North America. And this year we dropped 2 banners from the roof of the Planned Parenthood here in Washington, D.C. That said, most people of faith support legal abortion, and Catholics support abortion providers, abortion seekers, and abortion access. And that's what we're all about. Our faith calls us to be fearless and forthright and support reproductive freedom for all, and we answer that call.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I obviously people, whether they be Catholic or not, can resonate with a lot of what you're saying, right? We want to choose when we want to parent, if we want to parent, there should be no restrictions on that. I think, I'm preaching to the choir here, but now that everybody has met, all of our panelists have seen their faces, if you have any questions for them in the chat, please drop them in the Q&A and we will get to them at the end. I do want to go back to Jen. Like you mentioned, like a few of our other panelists had mentioned, Roe was really not enough. So where do we go from here? Like, what's next for abortion access?
Thanks, Paula. I feel like reflecting on a lot of what the other panelists have said, we're free right now to imagine what kind of world we want to live in and what kind of laws and services we want for our bodies. Abortion is a human right, and it's been stripped from us over many years. We all deserve not only legal protection, but meaningful access, abundant support, and the acknowledgement that abortion is our right. For me, that means thinking beyond making abortion legal and on to ensuring that it's truly accessible and is protected, as are all of our rights to bodily autonomy. I want to see lawmakers move beyond what's politic to dreaming of a perfect world for their constituents. We need to protect pregnant bodies and families with policies that care for them at work, that provide them medical coverage, and that ensure baseline rights for their children. I think about the 5 localities who passed initiatives that educate their public about the harms of fake abortion centers, or the 2 cities who increased their buffer zones around abortion clinics. We're in a moment where it's in our hands to provide the safety nets our Supreme Court refused to. We're surrounded by opportunity to build the future we all deserve for abortion access. The next few years are going to have a lot of change, and it's going to be a lot of what feels like negative change and more barriers to access. But long term, I really do believe that we'll be looking back at this moment as the beginning of a new era of liberation, where we really get to set the terms and we get to center the people, the Black and brown people, the trans people, all the people who are truly affected by these policies and our world.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. We're going to come back with some audience questions, but as I mentioned, if you have questions, drop them in the chat. I do want to take a moment and remind everybody that we want to keep our questions and comments respectful. We have a great panel today. We want to answer your questions, so keep that in mind. And I'm gonna switch over to Amani actually, because Jen did briefly mention, the courts aren't really going to help, or they didn't help us, right? We're taking into our communities, where our cities, we're working to expand access locally. But what can you tell us about the courts? What should we prepare for? Is there anything coming out of there that we should know, that we should, whether it be, a step in the right direction or another step back?
There we go. The federal courts are completely screwed. I mean, the Trump administration did so much damage to the federal courts that it makes me queasy to think about it. So right now there's a judge in Texas, a federal judge in Texas, Matt Kaczmarek, who is on the cusp of making medication abortion criminalized nationwide, even in states where it's completely legal, even in states where they have enlarged protection for abortion rights, like Vermont, Michigan, and California. There's also a Title X lawsuit in front of him brought by a guy who thinks that family planning and just birth control being in the ether somehow prevents him from raising his daughters to keep their legs closed, essentially. So, these 2 cases that are in this courtroom, it's a real danger, because the future of abortion access is self-managed abortion, right? And birth control, the way to keep the abortion rate low is to just put birth control everywhere. So these two cases are sitting in front of this Trump judge. This Trump judge used to work at Alliance Defending Freedom, which is the hate group labeled by the Southern Poverty Law Center, this anti-LGBTQ, pro merging of church and state Christian law firm that is bringing all of these lawsuits. They're just pipelining lawsuits to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, we cannot rely on them to be the court that I respected when I decided to go to law school. So federal courts are sort of out. What we should be focusing on is state courts. There's a lot of good stuff going on in state courts. And I think that is something that as progressives, Democrats, socialists, wherever you fall on the left end of the spectrum, we don't think about that enough. The reason that we are where we are is because Republicans knew that the way to power was A, to strike to get rid of voting rights, which they have done, and then B, to pack the courts. Democrats have not focused on that as much. And so that's why we are where we are. In state courts, however, there's a lot of, I don't know if it's because it's a more local environment, but there are conservatives even who are not as anti-choice as the Trump judges in federal court are. So specifically, what I try to tell people a lot is if you live in a state where you can elect your judges, then you should, if you can, get a community of people together and maybe try to put together some resources explaining to voters who the judges are that are on the ballot and what their positions are, even if it's just what their positions are on LGBTQ issues and abortion rights. Because that means that if a case goes before that judge, we're more likely to see good results. We're more likely to see pro-reproductive rights results. And in particular, we're more likely to see results from judges who aren't too keen on, for example, being told that the entire litigation structure in their state has to change to accommodate these anti-choice lawsuits, right? For example, I'm talking about Texas SB 8, right? There was that absurd law that essentially ended Roe almost a full year before the court actually finally decided to tell us why it was ending Roe. But this is a case where they essentially took law enforcement out of the hands of state agents and put it in the hands of just random bounty hunter people. And then they were telling state judges in court, well, you can't do anything about it because we've said in this law that you can't do anything about it. And there's something really, judges don't really like being told that they can't do their job. Judges don't really like being told that they can't follow the state constitution that they're supposed to follow. I mean, there was a Voting Rights Act case where, where Republicans are of the mind that state legislatures can pass whatever they want and not have to be beholden to state constitutions with respect to elections, right? This independent state legislature theory. If those types of bizarre political theories regarding voting rights and regarding democracy take hold, it makes it literally impossible for regular people to vote in their representatives. It makes it impossible for them to vote in judges who are going to uphold their rights. So it's really critical, I think, for people who are abortion-minded folks, who are abortion enthusiasts, to really start focusing on state courts because there's so much going on there. And I think to the extent that we can win at all in courts, it's state courts where it's going to happen. Now, will those cases end up at the Supreme Court eventually? And will the Supreme Court, knock them down? Yes, probably. But in my view, every day that abortion is available in a state is another day that people in that state can get abortions. So whatever people have to do with respect to the courts to widen that gap, to widen that opportunity, I think is very, very useful. But in terms of what we need to be worried about with respect to the courts and the Supreme Court, we need to really be worried about birth control, because they're coming for birth control. We need to really be worried about medication abortion, because they're coming for medication abortion. In fact, there's a lawsuit that was filed against the FDA by an organization called the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine. And I'm sure it would not surprise you to know that this is an organization that just popped up out of nowhere. They incorporated, quote unquote, incorporated in Texas so that they could file a lawsuit in this Trump judge's courtroom. And they're now basically saying that the FDA had no right to approve the two-pill abortion pill regimen back in 2000 when it did, because it's not safe, because it's ineffective. This is not true. It's all absolute lies. But as we know, Republicans, conservatives, anti-choicers can't win without lying, because if what if they were to tell even the people who are marching for them what they really want to do, I think the people who are marching for them would stop marching for them. If the people who are marching for them in college thought that, 10 years later down the line when they're 29, 30 years old and they're pregnant, perhaps they have an ectopic pregnancy and they're bleeding out on the table somewhere, they didn't think that their marching for life in college meant that they would have to wait on a gurney while hospital administrators and lawyers decide whether or not they're dying enough to warrant intervention, to warrant an abortion. So I'm probably strayed way far off from where the question was, but we're in a lot of trouble when it comes to federal court. We're in less trouble when it comes to state courts, but still in a lot of trouble because everything related to the courts is tied into voting rights, and they have spent a decade stripping Black and brown people and Democrats of their voting rights. So, and this is why I say it's so important to like practice radical joy, because once you start actually talking about what's going on, it's very depressing and it's very distressing because it seems like anti-democracy is taking hold. Fascism is taking hold. And it's real hard to be happy when you're living in a quasi-fascist state. But that's how organizing has, if you think about how organizing has gone on through the generations, it's groups, it's communities, it's love, it's people, it's harmony, working together, working in solidarity with other marginalized groups, trying to figure out a better way. So essentially, I agree with everything that Jen has said. Truly, she's nailed every single point.
Yes, both of you, brilliant, and it's true. We can't count on them. We're seeing these lies, this control, this manipulation in all areas, right? With these crazy people, you said abortion enthusiasts, and that's me. That's everybody on this panel, and probably everybody in our session. So yeah, keeping that energy, because like you said, and you gave us an assignment, focus on the state courts. What can we do? So on that same kind of idea, Shannon, I want to go to you because I know that we can't count on federal courts. You're probably going to have a similar thing for what's going on with federal policy. But can you tell us, like, for friends who are concerned with people who are concerned with friends and family in states without abortion access, are there any federal policies that are making abortion easier?
Yeah, unfortunately, I am going to say something similar in that, like, even when in the last Congress, Democrats were in control of the House and the Senate and the White House, we couldn't get anything passed on the federal level. And now we have even less of a, support in Congress. We know that very extreme antis are in control of the House. So fortunately, there is federal legislation that people can support. And after the Dobbs decision came out, there was all of these different types of bills that did everything from try to protect access to birth control to protect the ability to travel to other states to access care if people are able to. So Senator Cortez Masto actually introduced that bill, the Freedom to Travel for Healthcare Act, makes it clear that it's illegal to limit travel for abortion services or to penalize those who assist with travel. And she also introduced the Women's Health Patient Navigator Act, which would establish a grant program to support organizations like abortion funds that connect patients to abortion services. And so there are those types of bills. And we also have a really amazing bill called the Women's Health Protection Act, or WIPA, which would, help to protect abortion access nationwide by getting rid of all of these, we used to call them trap laws, like that, these medically unnecessary restrictions. And we also have the EACH Act, which would permanently end the Hyde Amendment, which blocks people who are enrolled in Medicaid or Medicare or other government health plans and programs from using their insurance coverage to pay for abortion services. So together, these bills really try to make abortion access accessible across the country and affordable, because care isn't actually accessible if you can't afford it. And we also have the Equal Rights Amendment. I don't need to tell folks in Nevada about how important the Equal Rights Amendment is, because you voted in November to adopt a really sweeping version of the ERA into your state constitution, which is amazing. And at the federal level, the ERA would represent an invaluable tool in combating these state abortion bans and restrictions because it would allow lawsuits arguing that they're one of many forms of sex discrimination that is outlawed by the ERA. And finally, I'll just talk a little bit. Imani just did a great job of talking about what's happening in the federal courts and federal judges. But Democrats are still in charge of the Senate, so we do maybe have a little bit of a chance to start remaking our federal judiciary. So by the end of his first term, Trump had actually appointed 3 Supreme Court justices, 54 or 30% of appellate judges, and more than a quarter of our entire federal judiciary. And this is really part of a decades in the making conservative policy effort to reshape and pack our federal courts with anti-abortion, anti-LGBTQ, anti-voting rights judges. And it's something that we have to really work diligently to counteract. So you can still support the nomination of judges who are independent and qualified and who represent the diversity of our nation and who are committed to upholding abortion rights and freedom of and from religion. So, for instance, last year, President Biden nominated Julie Rickleman to serve on the First Circuit Court of Appeals. And Julie Rickleman is really an amazing nominee. She spent a decade directing the National Litigation Strategy at the Center for Reproductive Rights. And she argued 2 landmark abortion rights cases, June Medical and the Dobbs case, before the Supreme Court. So you can support judicial nominees to the federal courts to help counteract the extreme damage that Trump did to our federal courts.
Thank you so much. I think Imani was going to jump in with a few things.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in real quick to elaborate on what I said. In terms of what people can do in their states, obviously some states, judges are appointed by the governor. There's nothing you can do about that. But what people can do in all states is advocate for the passage of a bill that Senator Mia McLeod in South Carolina introduced, I think in 2019, called the Pregnancy Accountability Act. And I like to call it the F You Pay Me Act, which is essentially, it's a bill that says, you know, if a state is going to force a person to carry their interest to term, and I always like to say, you're carrying the state's interest to term. Elie Mystal wrote about that in his book, because that's what it is. I mean, the state is forcing you to carry the state's baby. If they're going to do that, then they should be required to pay for all of your health care, you know, all of your prenatal health care. They should be required to pay for everything related to the birth. They should be required to have someone come to your house for the first 2 years of your child's life to help you in-house. They should have to pay for all SNAP benefits. All benefits that you receive cannot be reduced until the child turns 18. They have to pay for college. They have to pay for disability. I mean, they have to pay for everything. If the state is going to force you to do this, then the state should pay for it. I'll tweet out my thread about it if you want to follow me on Twitter at Angry Black Lady and grab it. It's an amazing piece of legislation, and there's no reason why Democrats in every state should not at least be introducing it and starting that conversation. We need to start the conversation about the fact that, for example, in Mississippi, pregnant people Black women are 118 times more likely to die in childbirth. And when they do give birth, if by some miracle they're able to, there's no clean drinking water, right? There are systemic issues that are making it impossible for people to do what the state is demanding us to do, which is carry their interest to term.
Yes, thank you so much. I love that. I want to go really briefly to Macy, because we do have a lot of questions in the chat regarding, abortion access in Nevada. And if you could just really briefly, so we get as much questions answered, just kind of briefly explain what it means that we codified Roe and what access in Nevada, abortion funds, all that helps us kind of expand access, protect access. I know that question was all over the place, but
that makes sense. I actually want to uplift a lot of what Imani was saying about centering joy. I think that's kind of what abortion funds do. And like one of our main things is what we're trying to do is make sure that somebody has access to live their life how they want. That people have access to either parent or not. That people have access to be able to afford their abortion so that they can live their life how they want to live their life, right? So that's just one of the things I do want to say. Like, as an abortion fund, that is what we're doing every single day. And basically, I'm assuming most people on this call know what abortion funds are, but just in case you don't, we're basically kind of like a mutual aid fund. So people give us a little bit of money each month. Those are our primary donors. They give us like $5 a month every single month, and we combine all of those dollars together and essentially pay the clinic directly for somebody's abortion. So somebody calls in and they tell us they are, this many weeks pregnant. We talk about where their abortion is scheduled for, and then we help them make sure that they can get it. We talk to the clinics on a weekly basis. We talk with hotels and other programs like that. We work with drivers. So we just make sure that people have the actual on-the-ground access to their abortion. And knowing that we're running short on time, I will say I'm not a lawyer, so the word codify is one of my least favorite words. But I do know that in Nevada, it was a vote of the people, so the only way to overturn that would be to do another vote of the people.
Thank you so much. And just to hit specifically on the question about Nevada and that was coming from the Q&A. What can people in Nevada do to support abortion access in light of so many restrictions? So I know you talked about, abortion access, funding abortion, how they can fund you, Wild West Abortion Fund. We'll make sure we put that in the chat. And while I'm on it, Imani, I just want to let you know we did share your Twitter handle so people can look up that information as well. But yeah, what else can they do here in Nevada?
So I think another thing that Nevada is really lacking is access to comprehensive sex ed. I think talking about things like that and making sure that people understand what abortion is incredibly important. Again, I keep quoting Imani, but the future of abortion is self-managed abortion. So pills are incredibly cheap. They're incredibly easy to access. They're incredibly well studied. Nobody understands how they work. Nobody knows what they are, and nobody understands the mechanisms, and nobody understands just how easy and convenient they can be and how it's safe. So one of the biggest things we could do is start talking about it more. Talk about how that works. Talk about what happens to somebody who finds out they're pregnant and they're under 11 weeks, as the vast majority of people are when they seek abortions. How do they get access to that and stay out of the clinic so that therefore other people who are further along and require more timely care can get to the clinic right away?
Thank you so much. And I am going to give you our last question, just because our audience is primarily from Nevada, and I think this speaks overall highly into what's next for abortion access. But how can people living in rural communities access abortion care?
Yeah, so I think for the most part, somebody in a rural community, Nevada's a very strange state, right? Like we're set up very, very bizarrely. So somebody who's far from Vegas or far from Reno, the easiest thing for them is going to be calling one of these pill by mail services. So Plan C Pills is a website that has a lot of information on it that'll show all of the different places you can access pill by mail. That would be my primary suggestion to anyone who's living outside of Vegas or Reno. If you're kind of close to an airstrip that could maybe get to Vegas or Reno, we have great partners over at Elevated Access that would help get people flights to one of the bigger cities. So yeah, those are my primary suggestions for that.
Thank you so much. And in our last 2 minutes, I just would like for everybody to go to just some final, real quick closing thoughts. So I'll go to Jen, and then Imani, Macy, and Shannon. Go ahead.
I think I've said a lot of what I felt like saying today, but I really want to echo what everybody else said on this panel, which is that building community, working within your community is an act of resistance. When you're feeling like the world is pushing you and like the systems are working against you, it's time to mess up the systems and make your own systems and make your own communities. And that's what abortion funds do. That's what abortion doulas do. That's what we're doing right now. And so there's time for mourning, there's time to sit and be sad, but when you've moved through that, there's a whole world of community building waiting for you to put your energy into, and you can make change.
Thank you so much, Imani.
First I wanted to alert people to an organization called If, When, How, and to tell people that if you find yourself on the wrong end of law enforcement with respect to a pregnancy outcome, first I want to let you know that when you go to the hospital, you don't have to tell them anything. You don't have to tell them what you took. You don't have to tell them what you did. because quite frankly, there are a lot of healthcare workers that are snitches, and they will call law enforcement, and you will end up arrested. I mean, it happened to Purvi Patel, and it happened to Amanda Kimber. There's I could list a litany of women who have had this problem. So if you find yourself in danger with law enforcement, look up the Repro Legal Defense Fund. I think it's reprolegaldefensefund.org. There's a helpline there. You can call them, they're lawyers, they will give you advice. But in this post-Roe world, not only do we have to take care of each other, but we have to take care of ourselves. So that means being very secure with your digital presence. It means very secure in what you're searching for, particularly if you live in an abortion hostile state. And also, another thing that I think that people should really think about is what they're willing to do to help people get abortions if it's illegal, right? I mean, I asked this question something like 4 years ago at a South by Southwest panel, and it's shocking that we're here. No, it's not shocking, but here we are 4 years later, and I'm like, okay, well, now's the time to figure out what you're willing to do to help someone. If you're not willing to break the law, I am positive that you know someone who is. If you're in the abortion rights community, not everyone is the bash windows type. Some of us are journalists, some of us are, activists, dualists, whatever. Then there are some people who are willing to break the law. Go find those people and ask for help.
Absolutely. In this crowd, it won't take you long. So, Macy, go ahead.
Oh, well, I just got really distracted thinking about how many windows I would break for Amani and anyone who Amani connected with me. No, I think that's really it. I touched on most of the things that I wanted to say. I'm just, I'm really happy that the word abortion is being used. That's kind of where I want to leave. I'm glad that we are at a stage and in a state where we can use this word, and that people know that it's not something that's meant to be stigmatized, and that it's something they can do to bring joy into their life.
Thank you so much. Shannon, go ahead and close this out.
Yeah, I just want to say that I'm so glad to be in community with all of you and to know that we are all in this together, and that I think that people are really realizing how much the ability to access abortion is connected to every single part of their lives. So if somebody cares about environmental justice, if they care about racial justice, economic justice, being able to access basic healthcare is so connected to that. So we can meet people where they are, and we can, continue to build our movement and continue to build our community together.
Awesome. Thank you, Paula, and thank you to this incredible panel of activists. We appreciate all of your work and support on this incredibly important issue. I will always say the word abortion over and over and over again. And it is something that is so near and dear to my heart. Of all the issues I have the privilege to work on, I think this is the one probably that rises to the top for me. And it's hard to pick sometimes, but abortion is the most important issue to me. So thank you all for commemorating this important anniversary with us today. And I appreciate every single one of you. We're going to take a quick break. You can visit the tables, talk to our amazing community partners, and we'll be back in just a few minutes with our Legislative 101 training. So stick around. We'll be right back.